Chapter 171 Return. Chapter 171. Return. Han Li half-squatted next to Junior Marshal Sister Chen in passing and lowered his head to look carefully at the soft and captivating appearance of this lustful woman. That curvaceous, plump body had naughtily exposed the abdomen, even slightly exposing a few mysterious areas, causing Han Li to become dry at the mouth and grow somewhat dizzy. He clearly understood that so long as he wished, the extraordinary beauty before him would immediately allow him to experience ecstasy that would seep into his very bones and allow him to become a true man. But after he blankly looked for a long while, Han Li reluctantly shifted his eyes away, returning his gaze towards the woman's face. He wrinkled his brow and suddenly extended his forefinger toward her almond lips, softly wiping them. After he felt that moist smoothness, he quickly retracted his hand and softly sniffed it. It truly is the joyful meeting pill. It seems he didn't lie, Han Li said to himself. A short moment after, it seemed he completely regained calmness. Great beauty, it seems your luck is quite good. Had you consumed some other aphrodisiac, I fear I would have truly ended your life early. However, since it is the joyful meeting pill, I don't necessarily have to. It can be assumed that you have already sunk into a hallucination and fundamentally cannot remember my appearance. Han Li softly said as he lifted the woman's chin with his hand and looked into her beautiful, bewitching eyes. In truth, the safest method would be to have you to disappear from this world. After all, even if you are hallucinating, you still might have a somewhat indistinct impression. Although this probability is very low, you should rejoice. Even though I am not a good person, I am not so vicious and fond of killing. I am also soft-hearted towards women. If you were a man, I would have cut you down without hesitation. Han Li continued to talk to himself, helplessly and bitterly smiling. Once this was said, Han Li became silent for a moment. After rigidly staring at the woman's dainty appearance for a good while, he lowered his head and suddenly kissed the woman's beautifully soft and alluring almond lips. Feeling him somewhat clumsily sucking on her lips, the woman passionately responded. After a long moment of ecstasy, Han Li reluctantly parted with the woman's alluring lips. The affair between males and females is truly wonderful. Although I cannot truly experience ecstasy, this intimate mouthful could be considered a reward for the kindness of saving your life. Han Li muttered, appearing absolutely reluctant to suffer a loss. As for this woman's Foundation establishment pill, because he had seized it from the hands of Senior Marshal Brother Lu, Han Li would not return it. Sigh. Your current appearance can truly tempt men. Had I not heard from Old Man Ma that men and women who lose their virginity have a reduced chance at reaching Foundation establishment, how could I possibly reject such a fine occasion and be forced to throw away my heart's desires? Han Li's complexion began to return to tranquility. However, he lightly shook his head, exposing a deeply regretful appearance. After all, between the pleasures of the night and the undertaking of cultivation, which was more important? Han Li immediately reined in his lust and cleared his mind. As for why that Senior Marshal Brother Lu didn't mind drugging and raping this woman, Han Li didn't need to think deeply to arrive at a conclusion. Seeing such an outstanding pretty boy, he had probably lost his virginity long ago, so he had no qualms about doing so. As a result, lacking the confidence to attempt reaching Foundation establishment and delaying in taking the Foundation establishment pill, he convenienced Han Li. Since Han Li's decision was already set, he did not intend to waste any time. First, he used fireballs to smash a large hole not far away and threw Senior Marshal Brother Lu's corpse inside. Then he burned the corpse to ashes and filled the hole until it was flat with dirt, thoroughly exterminating traces of the corpse. At the location of the battle, he felt that there were a few extremely district landmarks and used the long saber in his storage pouch to thoroughly slash and ruin the area, removing the slightest visible trail. Then, after he draped his own clothes on Junior Marshal Sister Chen, he carried her, hurriedly flying away from that place. After he flew west for more than 100 li, he found a rather large concealed cliff and descended. After he placed the woman down beneath the large rock, Han Li thought to immediately fly away, but he turned his head to glance at this woman's blushing appearance and couldn't help but sigh. Then he turned around and moved closer to Junior Marshal Sister Chen. He fished out a white porcelain bottle from his bosom and poured some white medicine powder into his palm. Then he used a finger from his other hand to scoop some of it into the woman's almond lips. He helplessly said to himself, Although this joyful meeting pill's lustful poison cannot take a person's life, it will not be dissolved for a long period of time, greatly injuring a person's strength. I suppose doing this good deed won't take much effort. This pure spirit powder will be enough to dissolve the poison." As Han Li said this, he saw the woman unconsciously lick the medicine. With the lovely appearance of her breathing on his finger, Han Li saw her lose her vigor. Han Li didn't dare to stay here much longer. He hastily put away the medicine bottle and hurriedly sailed his magic tool far away from there. He knew that it wouldn't be long before the woman would become clear-headed. If he did not depart, he could encounter great trouble. Han Li flew in the middle of the night on the shortest route toward Yellow Maple Valley before resting for a short moment. After the sky brightened, he entered the valley with an air of confidence and returned to the 100 Medicine Garden. After he entered the garden, he immediately shut himself away. For 3 days and 3 nights, he cleared away the majority of the impurities from his dantian. After there weren't enough remaining impurities to hinder him, he slowly recovered his lost true essence. Despite this, the aftermath of the great battle still left Han Li's strength greatly depleted. He reckoned that after a couple of months of recuperation, he would return to his peak state. This caused Han Li to feel that this entire event had been very much worth it. At this time, Han Li was sitting at his desk, admiring the greatest spoils of the battle, the 2 blue Foundation establishment pills the size of a broad bean. After he carefully scrutinized them for 2 hours, he returned the Foundation establishment pills to a copper bottle, an auxiliary magic tool, so that their spiritual chi would not dissipate. As for the azure bottle and the wooden box, he naturally destroyed them to prevent anyone from discovering what he wished to remain concealed. With this said, it was already several days after that battle. His losses had truly been not small. Not only was his flying sword treasure talisman destroyed, that high-quality magic tool, the fine steel ring, was also sacrificed. With regards to this, Han Li felt somewhat regretful. However, his spoils were also great. Apart from the Azure Flood Dragon Banner, Han Li found 2 other notable magic tools from Senior Marshal Brother Lu's storage pouch, the Azure Rope he used to launch a sneak attack on him, as well as a silver white hook. They seemed to both be high-quality magic tools. This was sufficient enough to make up for his loss of magic tools. Not to mention the several tens of low to mid-grade talismans and over 20 low-grade spirit stones. It was unfortunate that there were no elementary high-grade talismans. There was only the Wind Wall Technique talisman that Han Li had turned to scrap during the battle. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to arrange all of his loot once through. Apart from the items he would personally use and the very precious items, he destroyed the rest to avoid future troubles. After that, he started to impatiently think about the matter of the Foundation establishment pills. Han Li was completely ignorant of how to consume the Foundation establishment pill. Was it as simple as swallowing the Foundation establishment by itself, or was he required to prepare other medicines in advance and perform other actions? Should he even draw support from some external power? Common conventions say that such a rare medicine pill should truly have some specific qualities. Because Han Li hadn't acquired the Foundation establishment pill beforehand, there was nothing he previously had to pay attention to. He planned to wait until after the trial by blood and fire to ask around. After all, failure in the trial by fire would render everything else worthless. He didn't expect to possess the Foundation establishment pill now and, moreover, have 2 of them at that. This was a pressing matter. Half a day later, Han Li arrived at the Cultivation Guidance Pavilion. He returned to his residence, blankly resting his upper body on the table. After being lost in thought for quite a few hours, he suddenly smashed his fist against the corner of the table, causing his fist to turn completely red. He ignored the pain as if it wasn't there. Not long before, on the pretext of wanting to learn new magic techniques, he made a few indirect inquiries toward Wu Feng for the majority of the day. Eventually, he uncovered the method of taking the Foundation establishment pill. However, this did not result in good news for him in the slightest. It turned out that to take the Foundation establishment pill and pass the barrier to Foundation establishment, it did not require consuming any medicine beforehand or external aid. Unexpectedly, it merely required direct consumption. It was reasonable to say that this news couldn't be better for Han Li. However, Wu Feng's next words struck Han Li in the head. There would be a new problem that arose after taking the medicine, causing Han Li to feel greatly perplexed. Once again, Han Li found himself facing a dilemma. Chapter 172 Choice. Chapter 172. Choice. At the northern region of the Jian province, at some desert mountain at the border of the state of Yu and the state of Yuanwu, stood several tens of yellow-clothed people of various height. Their clothes were fluttering with the wind, and their ages had nothing in common. There were some who were old and grey-haired with a face full of wrinkles, near the end of their lives, as well as smooth-skinned, white-teethed, and red-lipped juveniles who had yet to enter adulthood. They all stood silently in rows. At the front was naturally an imposing old man. With his hands behind his back, he motionlessly looked toward the sky, lost in thought. There were 4 men and 1 woman behind him, each with a respectful bearing. Among them was that martial Uncle Wang who had brought Han Li to enter the sect. He currently had a solemn expression. Behind those 5 people, there were 2 orderly rows of yellow-clothed disciples, all with different expressions. A few were nervous, others were either ill at ease, unconcerned, or even glancing all around. There were a few smiling silently, not showing their true intentions. At the end of the last row, there was a common dark-skinned youth with lowered eyes. He had been looking at the edge of his feet from the very beginning. He didn't dare to shift his gaze in the slightest, seeming unusually shy. However, none of these people knew that this yellow boy was silently cursing with resentment. This youth who was different from the others was Han Li. The group of yellow-clothed individuals were the Yellow Maple Valley's disciples who were about to join the trial by blood and fire. Han Li ultimately decided to participate in this almost certain death excursion. The matter of the 2 Foundation establishment pills was a hapless joke. A month before, after Han Li found the method to take the Foundation establishment pill from Wu Feng, he was greatly shocked. It turned out that those taking the Foundation establishment pill must enter seclusion for 3 months and must use up all of the medicinal power before exiting. Otherwise, the medicinal power would scatter, greatly reducing the pill's efficacy. That was why finding out whether or not one succeeded in reaching Foundation establishment required several months. Having to wait for such a long time greatly discouraged Han Li. His original plan after acquiring the 2 Foundation establishment pills was to first take the pills and then see whether or not he had to participate in the trial by fire. If he were lucky enough to reach Foundation establishment, then he definitely wouldn't go to such a dangerous region. After all, only 1 in 4 survived. It was truly too frightening. If he failed after taking the pills, then it would be imperative that he would enter the forbidden area. If 2 or 3 Foundation establishment pills wouldn't do, then he would refine 3, 4, or even more pills. He was convinced that his aptitude was far too lacking, and only by taking several Foundation establishment pills would he be certain to enter Foundation establishment. However, with the restriction that he must be secluded for 3 months after taking the pill, Han Li's plan was thrown into disarray, causing him to face an awkward situation where he couldn't get everything he wanted. Now, he had to either take the Foundation establishment pill and completely give up on entering the forbidden area, or he could temporarily put away the Foundation establishment pill and wait until after the trial by blood and fire to consume the pills. It was impossible to have the best of both worlds. After pondering this for almost half a month, Han Li felt that with regards to his terrible aptitude, even if he were to consume both of the Foundation establishment pills, his chances of entering Foundation establishment were still quite low, so he could not give up on the trial by blood and fire. Actually, it wasn't like Han Li hadn't considered waiting 5 more years to participate in the next trial by blood and fire. At that time, even if he failed to enter Foundation establishment, his eternal spring arts would have definitely reached its peak. As such, he would have a much greater ability to defend himself. However, not long after Han Li thought of this, the Yellow Maple Valley's upper echelon made a declaration that greatly shocked the cultivation world of the state of Yu, causing this idea of his to vanish into thin air. The details were, 5 years from now, the forbidden area of the trial of blood and fire would be placed under a temporarily 60-year seal. During this time, the 7 great sects would work together and forbid anyone from entering and gathering medicine. Sealing the forbidden area temporarily was not a rare affair. Almost every 300 to 400 years, the 7 great sects would do this. Because the forbidden area was often opened, the spiritual qi within would leak in great quantities. The appearance and growth of spiritual medicines would also suffer as a result. This temporary seal was to allow the density of spiritual qi to return to normal levels. However, although the 7 great sects adopted this measure, the spiritual medicines of the forbidden area were still sparse year after year and were increasingly difficult to find. Those particular spiritual medicines required to refine pills were especially rare. According to a deduction of some knowledgeable expert from the 7 great sects, if one truly wanted to restore the spiritual medicines within the forbidden area to regular quantities, they must seal the area for no less than a full millennium. This temporary seal was nothing more than a postponement of the eventual exhaustion of the forbidden area's spiritual medicines. After all, the growth of spiritual medicines wasn't a matter of merely 1 or 2 days. Despite the actual circumstances within the forbidden area, nobody was able to deny or confirm this conjecture. However, the leaders of the 7 great sects were incapable of such a painful decision. The quantity of Foundation establishment pills was closely related to the rise and fall of their sects. If there was a shortage of these pills lasting 50 to 60 years, the 7 great sects would merely suffer some superficial damage. However, if several hundred or even 1,000 years passed without Foundation establishment pills, then not just the 7 great sects, but also the entire cultivation world of the state of U would be confronted with a life or death crisis. After all, an area without Foundation establishment cultivators, could that still be called a cultivation world? If the time came, the cultivation clans and rogue cultivators would all depart the state of U and look to survive elsewhere. At that time, the 7 great sects would not be an exception. As a result, although they knew that frequently opening the forbidden area was a folly equivalent to killing the chicken that laid the eggs, the 7 great sects could not help but do so. They could only hope that before the spiritual medicines of the forbidden area were truly extinguished, they could produce other spiritual medicines to replace them. This caused the great sects' core formation experts, even those nascent soul eccentrics, to go out of their way to look for another source of spiritual medicines or to find another solution to prevent their respective sects from falling. Naturally, Han Li could not have known this. But with this new information, there was no way Han Li would dare to wait 5 more years for the next trial by blood and fire. Even slow-minded individuals would realize that when the forbidden area opened in 5 years, it would unconditionally be a storm of blood. Each of the great sect's elite disciples would be put forth in order to scavenge for the last time before the forbidden area was sealed away. If Han Li did not participate in this trial by fire, then he would be bringing about his own destruction. Even if this announcement caused the upcoming trip to the forbidden area to have greater troubles and more desperate battles, regardless of this, the next was certain to be even more bloody. As for the folly of participating in the trial by blood and fire 50 years later, he didn't even think of it. By then he would have passed optimal age to enter Foundation establishment. Even if he were able to barely enter Foundation establishment, he would certainly not be able to tread the path of cultivation for much longer. This was not the outcome Han Li desired. With that way in mind, Han Li enlisted to participate in the medicine gathering group and waved his life away. Unexpectedly, the appearance of that martial Uncle Wang caused Han Li to feel greatly surprised and somewhat regretful. When martial Uncle Wang saw Han Li, he was even more surprised. On one hand, he was greatly astonished that this new disciple would participate in the trial by blood and fire. On the other hand, he almost couldn't believe how far Han Li's cultivation had advanced. With Han Li's aptitudes, how could he progress with his cultivation from the 9th layer to the 11th layer within such a short period of time? This was far too shocking. If Han Li were an outstandingly talented disciple, then it wouldn't be strange. It would be more strange if he hadn't reached the 11th layer by now. However, he had personally tested Han Li's false spiritual roots. How could he have cultivated so fast? With regards to his spiritual roots, for Han Li to enter the sect at the 9th layer was already extraordinary. Usually, only by being bestowed magic power by an elder and frequently consuming a few spiritual medicines, along with diligent and bitter cultivation, could someone be able to achieve this. However, with Han Li currently standing before him with a cultivation base at the 11th layer, he was incomparably shocked. Since martial Uncle Wang was doubtful, he impolitely pulled Han Li to the side and tested his attributes once more. The result was the same as before and stomped any suspicions of mutated spiritual roots. This caused martial Uncle Wang to be at a loss. Chapter 173. The gathering Han Li responded with "I don't know" to all of the questions. insisting that his cultivation today was all because of his hard work. As for how he was able to cultivate and improve at this alarming rate, Han Li used a mysterious story that he had previously prepared about how he mistakenly ate a magical fruit when he was a child. He told this to Martial Uncle Wang, then blamed everything onto the magical fruit. He prepared this excuse specifically to handle this kind of situation. Han Li knew that a believable lie should consist of 70% truth and 30% falsehood, so the magical fruit that he described wasn't solely from his imagination. It was a fruit that had been rumored for thousands of years, the Immortal clan's dragon scale fruit. It was said that people who ate it could be reborn and could soar in the sky. As for whether or not it truly existed, there was no way for Han Li to find out, but regardless, no one had ever actually eaten it. As soon as this Martial Uncle Wang, who had read many books, heard Han Li's description of the magical fruit, his eyes brightened up. He actually found an ancient book from somewhere called The Record of Wondrous Objects, and found an article regarding the dragon scale fruit for Han Li to identify. As things had gotten to this point, Han Li would naturally admit it with ease. Amazed, Martial Uncle Wang made a tsk sound. Han Li also told him that once he picked the fruit, the plant's original roots immediately withered away and died. That way, there would absolutely be no more of this fruit even if they went back to the original location. This was to make sure the other party would not try asking around in an attempt to find more of the fruit for himself, thereby completely putting an end to the story. As for whether or not this person would be greedy, believed it to be true, or try to go elsewhere to find another such fruit, it was none of his business. Let him busy himself with it. Han Li knew very clearly that even though Martial Uncle Wang acted as if he completely believed him, and even though Han Li had answered all of his questions, there was no way of knowing how much he actually believed him. The other party was probably in half belief and half doubt, in between trusting and not trusting. So with this Martial Uncle Wang, Han Li should avoid and hide from him if possible in the future, as well as pay more attention in case the other party got suspicious. But Han Li believed that as long as he could successfully enter Foundation establishment, then his identity would be quite different. Even if Martial Uncle Wang still had doubts in his heart, he wouldn't provoke him that easily. After all, the cultivation world spoke with strength. Finally, Han Li brushed off the questions about his own cultivation. As for Martial Uncle Wang, it was unclear whether or not he was apologetic about all the questionings from before, but he didn't make things difficult for Han Li at the registration. He helped him through all the paperwork very easily, and warned him about some precautions he should prepare prior to entering the Forbidden area. Han Li gave a mouthful of thanks, then said goodbye and left. After he returned, he greeted the little old man and temporarily stopped his work at the medicinal herb garden so that he could prepare for the trial by blood and fire without any distractions. Hearing this, the little old man was silent for a while. He used a strange expression that said "You're already dead" and kept on staring at Han Li. This made Han Li's heart uneasy for a long time. But what surprised him was that before this senior Martial Uncle Ma left, he gave Han Li 2 bottles of medicine without any hesitation. He said coldly, "1 bottle for internal use, and the other for external use." He then flew away on his flying magic tool with an indifferent expression. This gesture slightly warmed Han Li's heart. After the past 2 years of spending time together, he understood that although the little old man's temperament was eccentric, he was a person with a cold appearance and a warm heart. He was just somewhat absorbed in the art of medicine creation. He was being treated with warmth now, which meant that senior Martial Uncle Ma already saw him as his nephew, making Han Li feel moved. 3 days before entering the Forbidden Area, Martial Uncle Wang finally sent Han Li a letter, urging him to gather at the meeting hall to get ready to go. When Han Li arrived, the disciples who registered for the trial by fire and blood were all gathered there, silently judging each other. There were more than 10,000 disciples from the whole Yellow Maple Valley that were of Qi condensation. Han Li naturally wouldn't know all of them, but there was still one woman that Han Li couldn't be more familiar with. Not only did Han Li know this woman, he had seen and even touched her whole body, the junior Martial Sister Chen who got drugged and almost raped by Martial Brother Lu. Speaking of which, after Martial Brother Lu had been killed by Han Li, it caused a small commotion in the Yellow Maple Valley. Even though this person hadn't even reached Foundation establishment, he was after all an owner of mutated spiritual roots, making him a low-level disciple that the sect's upper echelon paid close attention to. As for junior Martial Sister Chen, after she came back, for an unknown reason, she didn't discuss what had happened on that night to anyone and refused to speak of the matter. As a result, the martial brother Lu, who had disappeared for a long time, was treated as a missing person. After contacting different disciples and searching within the sect without getting any results, this matter was slowly dropped. These types of people disappeared from the valley all the time. It's not like similar situations had never occurred before. Martial brother Lu wasn't the first, and he definitely wouldn't be the last. After the initial reaction period had passed, no one in Yellow Maple Valley ever mentioned Martial brother Lu again, as if he never even existed. This situation put Han Li at ease, but he also felt a cold chill. It was expected that most cultivators were people who restrained their desires. If one day Han Li himself disappeared, the reactions within the sect would presumably be not as overwhelmed by the reactions they were having now. Most likely in the blink of an eye, he would be completely forgotten, and no one would waste their time or energy trying to inquire about his whereabouts. Ever since he entered the sect, he had absolutely made the right decision by maintaining a low profile and a cautious attitude. After all, the road of cultivation was very long, so there was a high possibility for accidents to happen. If Han Li attracted more attention to himself or did stupid things to show off, then a low-level cultivator who didn't even have a background and support like him would be squashed to death by a stronger existence at any moment on the long road of cultivation. The possibility of stepping on the road of cultivation in another life would be so low it was almost non-existent. Han Li originally didn't believe in reincarnation that much, but ever since he had come in contact with the cultivation world, he had become less doubtful. The attitude of junior martial sister Chen was obviously different from before. Han Li was not sure if it was because she was affected by her lover's betrayal, but she didn't have any makeup on. She seemed cold but elegant, and her whole body was emitting an atmosphere that demanded strangers to stay away. During this time, a few young guys tried to talk to her because they were attracted by her beauty, but they were all shot down in defeat. It wasn't because the men were cheap. This woman's cold and arrogant expression not only did not reduce her beauty, but it also added a bit more mysterious charm to it. It made all the surrounding male disciples try to sneak a peek at her. This kind of charm was even more attractive than the image of a timid, lovable little woman that she had when she was with that martial brother Lu before. But after Han Li saw this, he was annoyed. There was no question that another woman who despised men was born into this world. After experiencing the betrayal of her lover, it probably won't be easy for this woman to open her heart to another man. She probably even decided to grow old and die alone. This junior martial sister Chen didn't recognize Han Li. Han Li deliberately walked in front of her a few times, but he only received a cold expression in response. She obviously saw him as one of the people who was trying to show off to her. Han Li was relieved. The psychedelic power of the joyful meeting pill really was strong. This woman didn't remember him at all. Because of this, the last thing for him to worry about was completely eliminated. But when he thought about how passionate and desirable her naked body looked that night, and then saw how cold and frozen junior martial sister Chen looked now, Han Li's heart was filled with desire and regrets. Speaking of which, the reason she would participate in the trial by blood and fire was likely thanks to him. After losing the Foundation Establishment pill, if this woman wanted to achieve Foundation Establishment, she would have to gamble for it just like him. After all, this trip to the Forbidden Area was the only fast path to getting a Foundation Establishment pill. The disciples who were participating in the trip to the Forbidden Area in the Yellow Maple Valley were truly the sect's elite, all of them strong and muscular. Just counting the disciples who reached the peak of 13th layer, there were as much as 5 or 6 of them. Most of the other disciples were at the 12th layer. Junior martial sister Chen was at the middle of the 12th layer. The rest of the disciples were in the 11th layer, and there were only 3 of them. Besides Han Li, there was an old man whose hair was all white and a young fellow who looked 16 or 17. Seeing them made Han Li feel an uneasy chill in his heart. The 3 of them were probably only there to make up for the numbers and to be cannon fodder. Following past customs, the low-level disciples who could enter the Forbidden Area in the 7 Great Sect could not exceed 25 people. The number could only be less, but not more. For the past few times, they couldn't get enough people at all. Usually they only got about 10 people to participate in the trial by blood and fire. But this time, not only did the maximum number get reached, many elite disciples appeared here. This proved that this trip to the forbidden area for gathering medicinal herbs would definitely exceed the normal standards of the past, and the number of people who could survive would certainly be less than a quarter. Seeing this expected scenario, Han Li, aside from cursing in his mind, was feeling completely helpless. It was no question that these elite disciples must have each been given extra incentives by the higher powers within the sect, otherwise they wouldn't have appeared here. Chapter 174 Martial Ancestor Li. Chapter 174 Martial Ancestor Li. After they heard Sect Master Zhong Lingdao's encouragements, two honored disciples entered the halls with trays in their hands. One of the trays had a gold-threaded storage pouch. The other tray had a small pile of multicolored mid-grade spirit stones. It seemed it was time to fulfill what was previously agreed. This could be considered the encouragement to fight. Han Li thought this slightly maliciously. The mid-grade spirit stones were basically free for everyone to choose. Han Li already had an earth attribute and a fire attribute mid-grade spirit stone, so he picked a blue, water attribute spirit stone. Nobody fought him over this. However, when spiritual tools were extracted from the storage pouch, the disciples gave cautious glances. This storage pouch was unlike common storage pouches. It only required spiritual sense to store items instead of spiritual power. In addition, any spiritual power that was injected could later be absorbed by the items stored within. This bag also interrupted a cultivator's spiritual sense inspection. So long as one extended their hand, they would be able to take out any stored spiritual tool. As for what item they would take out in the end, it would be hard to say. They could only determine it with the feel of their hand. This storage pouch was specialized to extract spiritual tools and had been refined precisely for this purpose. Otherwise its practicality couldn't be compared to that of common storage pouches, of which case who would use it? Although it was completely filled with high-quality magic tools, defensive magic tools were rarer than offensive magic tools. Furthermore, as high-quality defensive and offensive magic tools, their characteristics were greatly different. If one could take out a suitable magic tool, their odds of surviving the trial by blood and fire were sure to slightly increase. For those disciples lacking magic tools, they would be even more meticulous. However, Han Li did not care. On his previous trip to the city market, he swept clean the entire treasure collection that the 10,000 treasures store had accumulated for many years and was able to obtain 2 magic tools of the finest quality. Not to mention the Azure Flood Dragon banner as well as other high-quality magic tools he acquired afterwards. To receive just another high-quality magic tool did not excite him. When it was Han Li's turn to step forward, most of the people had already drawn a magic tool from the bag. As for what magic tool they drew, they naturally did not say and did not take them out for others to see. Han Li extended his hand toward the pouch and randomly made a blind grab, acquiring a peculiar-looking object. His heart grew excited, and he instantly put it into his storage pouch while taking a stealthy glance. After a moment of slight distraction, he immediately put it away. At this moment, the person behind him already impatiently moved forward. When Han Li saw this, he tactfully left and returned to the place where he originally stood. With the magic tool selection concluded, a few people came in from outside the hall. They were the many stewards Han Li saw when he first entered the sect. Martial Uncle Wang and that old man Yi whom Han Li truly despised were included among them. These people all had an unusual expression. They all respectfully escorted a square-faced old man at their center. There wasn't even a single person who dared to whisper to one another. The old man appeared 50 to 60 years old with his hair somewhat gray. However, he had a healthy red face and a spirited complexion with a pair of naturally imposing tiger eyes. With a single look, one could tell that this person was of a resolute disposition. After his gaze swept past the disciples, Han Li immediately felt that his 5 viscera and 6 bowels had been clearly seen by this person, causing him to be overwhelmed with amazement. The moment Great Sect Master Zhong saw this man walk in, he hastily welcomed him as Martial Uncle Li with a faint trace of flattery. Seeing this, the disciples were greatly stunned. However, the other stewards' expressions were as usual. Not only did they lack any contempt, but they also showed great envy when they saw this elder respond to Zhong Lingdao with a few words. It seemed that to have this elder respond to the words martial uncle was a seldom held honor. As Han Li and the other unknowing young disciples were astonished at the sight before them, Sect Master Zhong introduced this elder to the crowd of disciples. The name of this martial Uncle Li was a name Han Li and company had long heard of. He was one of the core formation martial ancestors that they had never seen, Martial Ancestor Li. This trip to the Forbidden Area would be led by Martial Ancestor Li along with a squad of stewards, including Martial Uncle Wang. After Sect Master Zhong's introduction, Martial Ancestor Li very clearly and concisely said the two words set off, concluding Han Li's and the other juniors' first encounter with him. Then he took the lead, departing from the hall. Han Li and company were completely dumbfounded. However, they hurriedly followed closely at the steward's urging. As the disciples left the hall, they inhaled a breath of cold air. Just as they left the hall, they saw a huge brilliant silver monster over 20 zhong long, suspended in midair. Its enormous body produced an oppressive grandeur, bringing about a feeling of suffocation. That martial ancestor Li was standing on top of the head of the monster and watching them with indifference. Han Li rubbed his eyes and then carefully looked several times as his heart continued to jump. What he clearly saw was unexpectedly a seldom seen silver python. However, this python was truly extraordinary. Its head had an additional jet black horn, causing it to appear ever more terrifying and malevolent. This is the strength of a core formation expert. He's even able to cause this demonic beast to yield and follow his orders as he pleases. This is far too incredible. Han Li was completely convinced by this martial ancestor's method. If he were to reach core formation, then he would also hold such great magic power. Han Li felt all the blood in his body flow backwards from excitement. Before he saw martial ancestor Li, Han Li felt that his vague and muddled path of cultivation was not clear. But after this moment of shock, the might of this martial ancestor's profoundly amazing magic gave him a clear figure to pursue on the path of cultivation, greatly securing his confidence to cultivate the path of immortality. Everyone, come up and stand well behaved. My horned silver python's flight speed is far faster than your magic tools. It will only require 2 days to reach the destination. It was as if martial ancestor Li did not see the chaotic circumstances below him. After he lightly stroked the silver python's huge horn, he gave this instruction with a tranquil expression. Like that, Han Li and company stood on the python with fear and trepidation and rushed through their journey for 2 days and 2 nights. Eventually they arrived at some nameless desert mountain. This martial ancestor truly did not speak falsely. The speed of this monster's flight was truly astonishing, far greater than what the disciples' flying tools were capable of. It was only natural, as none of them had a good flying tool. When they arrived, the crowd of disciples received a few bits of information from the stewards. This was where the sects agreed to assemble. The 7 great sects would assemble there and set off together to the Forbidden Area, since the power of a sole sect or clan was not enough to enter the Forbidden Area. The appointed time was tomorrow morning. However, because the Forbidden Area was within the borders of the Jing province, Yellow Maple Valley was considered to be half a host. As a result, the sect arrived a day earlier and would wait for the other sects at this mountain. Right now, the crowd of disciples could freely move. Tomorrow, they would have to meet together and move in an orderly fashion. Since the stewards have said as such, Han Li and the others naturally dispersed. They went about the mountain doing their own things, making a few final preparations on the eve of a great battle. Thus, among the 20+ yellow-clothed disciples, there were those who sat cross-legged and honed their spirit, and others who took out their magic tools and continuously wiped them clean. There were also those who were blankly lost in thought with an appearance of deep worry. But there were even several people who chatted as usual, filled with ease. They were completely relaxed, as if they were on a sightseeing trip. Han Li paid particular attention to these few people. At this moment, Han Li heard the sounds of footsteps behind him, and he slightly wrinkled his brow. In order to remain inconspicuous, he deliberately chose to sit alone at an unremarkable corner. Why would someone come here? Junior Marshal Brother Han. My humble self named Xiong salutes you. I wish to speak to Junior Marshal Disciple about tomorrow's early trip to the Forbidden Area. This concerns Junior Marshal Brother's life or death. Could we have a chat? The aged but smooth voice caused Han Li's brows to become even more tense. Although Han Li had not yet seen the voice's owner, Han Li could already tell that this man was crafty and could be considered untrustworthy. He immediately assumed that trouble had come to find him. However, Han Li understood that it would be better to offend a gentleman than to offend a villain. Although he was completely unwilling, he reluctantly turned around and saw two people behind him, one old and one short. Chapter 175 Clear Void Sect. Chapter 175 Clear Void Sect. After he clearly saw the two people's appearances, Han Li inwardly sighed. They were unexpectedly the same as him, disciples who have cultivated to the 11th layer. One appeared old, but his eyes showed a trace of cunning. The other appeared honest and naive. It was clear that he was an inexperienced youngster. This strange pair had sought him, causing Han Li to truly feel a bit surprised. However, Han Li faintly guessed their purpose in coming after some slight thought. Is there something on these senior martial brothers' minds? Han Li coldly asked from courtesy, but he used an unintimate tone, undoubtedly revealing his attempt to have them retreat from an awkward situation. Clearly, this senior martial brother Xiong's face was far thicker than Han Li imagined. Not only did he not mind Han Li's 1,000 miles distant tone, but actually used a familiar and enthusiastic tone. Does junior martial brother Han have a good plan for tomorrow's trip to the forbidden area? Our magic power is quite meager. It's quite possible that we will be the first to fall in a fiery melee with the other sects. Wouldn't it be better for us to negotiate and think of a countermeasure? When Han Li heard this, he blinked his eyes several times and didn't speak. Nevertheless, he was completely certain of the other party's intentions. Their words were pretty close to his own guesses. It seemed this old schemer planned to rope in a few disciples with feeble magic power and have them move and fight together, increasing security by much as well as greatly increasing their odds of survival. However, Han Li clearly understood that this action came with both advantages and disadvantages. If people were to concentrate in one place, the area they could search would be considerably less, greatly decreasing the amount of spiritual medicines they could find. As for how the spiritual medicines would be distributed in the end, that was also hard to say. It would probably be decided by strength. Han Li naturally hadn't the slightest interest in an alliance. Not only would there be no advantages, but he was also more than likely to be used as cannon fodder. As for this old schemer, he probably held no good intentions and was certain to take advantage of a crisis for personal gain by resorting to self-serving manipulations. The old man saw that Han Li remained speechless after he finished speaking. He couldn't help but feel anxious, so he flusteredly said, "I actually have an idea." Perhaps junior martial disciple has heard these words before, but this idea will absolutely ensure that everyone survives safely through the trip. The old man put up a profoundly mysterious expression and squeezed the wrinkles on his forehead for a moment. Han Li found his appearance to be quite humorous. The yellow-haired youngster next to him seemed to greatly admire this old schemer. Although he didn't say anything, he exposed an expectant expression towards the old man. Since he absolutely wasn't going to join their alliance, Han Li was unwilling to be tangled any further and bluntly rejected. "I am sorry. My humble self is not accustomed to working with others. I also do not intend to do so this time as well. If senior martial brother wishes to join hands with others, then it would best to look for other junior martial brothers." Han Li spoke very straightforwardly and incisively. Han Li knew that only by clearly showing that he wasn't an inexperienced novice would he able to make the other party give up and not continue to tangle with him. Otherwise, if this senior martial brother Xiong felt there was the slightest chance to convince his fellow sect member, he would mostly likely continue to pester him. Han Li did not want to be bothered by this person. When old man Xiong heard this, he realized he sought the wrong target. Although the person before him seemed quite young, his words were practiced and careful. He was clearly an experienced person who had passed through trials and hardships. The old man spoke no more rubbish and took his leave with a slightly angry appearance. Han Li saw them head in the direction of another disciple who was currently meditating on top of a rock. Han Li faintly smiled and turned his body back, continuing to observe the several noteworthy fellow sect members. However, this time he saw junior martial sister Chen and a woman of a common appearance standing next to her. There were a few talented and handsome men faintly gathering nearby. The corner of Han Li's mouth moved several times. Although he did not know why, he felt unfavorably towards those few men. He finally decided that what was out of sight was out of mind, and looked for an uninhabited area to close his eyes and rest. Like that, the next morning had arrived. All of the disciples arrived at the mountain peak once more and stood in orderly rows, waiting for the arrival of the other immortal sects. After waiting for several hours, they had yet to see a single person, causing Han Li to inwardly rain endless curses. He almost suspected that the other sects were doing this deliberately as to consume the physical strength of everyone from Yellow Maple Valley. However, what caused Han Li to feel even more distraught was that, as chance had it, Junior Marshal Sister Chen had been assigned to stand to his right. With the familiar scent of her body occasionally entering his nostrils, his imagination was somewhat let loose as if he was returning to that extremely alluring night. In order to cover up the oddities from his face, with no better option left, Han Li lowered his head and feigned the appearance of great unease. However, his heart was filled with great and unending complaints. She was a pretty woman, but could her beauty go as far as for him to lose his self-control? However, this martial ancestor Li whom Han Li greatly admired stood at the very front. He stood with his face to the sky and was able to stand in such a manner for an unexpectedly long amount of time. It was unknown whether or not he went on a mental journey or if he was pondering about something. Suddenly, Han Li felt a disturbance in his surroundings. It seemed that something happened. He could not help but raise his head. His fellow sect members all looked up toward the sky without exception and looked toward the horizon. Han Li also followed their gazes. He saw that there were several star-like twinkling streaks of light in the deep blue sky, gradually growing larger. A short moment later, a series of black dots also appeared. Underneath the black dots, the silver lights flashed. It seemed the black dots were riding the streaks of starlight across the sky. Seeing this marvel, everyone became even more restless. Quiet. What kind of children are you? This is the Clear Void sect's flying magic tool, the Rainbow Snow Silk. Do not make a fuss and lose face for our Yellow Maple Valley. A short and stout middle-aged steward turned his head to give several reprimanding words with a dark complexion. Those words were quite effective. The restlessness was immediately settled, and after that, there were only occasional whispers. At this moment, the black dots already became clear. Each of them was a cultivator wearing grey Daoist robes. The majority of them were true Daoist priests, each holding a horsetail whisk with their hair tied up into a bun. However, those who did not wear Daoist robes appeared to be mortals, as if they were sheltered children who had yet to leave home. Han Li and the others clearly saw that the stars beneath their feet were actually a stiff white rainbow bridge covered with dazzling specks of silver-white light. It was unknown how the specks of light were embedded within the object. As Han Li carefully watched the scene, the white rainbow bridge carrying the Clear Void sect's members descended onto the mountain and landed across from the members of Yellow Maple Valley. Their leader, a middle-aged Daoist priest, lightly moved his hand, and the white light flashed. The Rainbow Snow Silk's rainbow bridges disappeared, and in his hand appeared a brocade object. I didn't think that Benefactor Li would be leading this time. This humble Daoist Fu Yunzi greets you. This Daoist priest walked several steps to the front of martial ancestor Li and spoke with radiant happiness. From his tone, it seemed they were acquaintances. Humph! If this old facetious Daoist could come, then why couldn't I come? Martial ancestor Li bluntly said with both hands behind his back. Within each sect, we've entered core formation the latest. If we didn't do these errands, who would? The Daoist priest didn't mind in the least, and he swung his horsetail whisk with a constant smile. This old facetious Daoist is wily and cunning. Last time, you brought suffering upon me. Don't think you will get the chance to do so again. What is Benefactor Li talking about? Recognizing lost bets is a right and proper matter. Who was possibly wronged? The Daoist priest laughed. When martial ancestor Li heard this, a cold light flashed through his eyes. It seemed that he was about to be angry, but he immediately thought of something and stepped down with grandeur, unwillingly saying, "After that chunk of iron essence was refined into your great azure sword, its power greatly increased. This Li spent 10 years purifying it but nonetheless had to cheaply give it away to this old facetious Daoist." His words contained great grievances. It was clear he felt much heartache over that iron essence. So it turns out that the renowned immortal Master Li actually cared so much about a mere piece of iron essence. Fine, this time I will produce another item, one definitely greater than that iron essence. If you win this bet, you will be able to make up for your previous loss. The Daoist priest said with a smile as he twirled his beard.